compliance with the law in the future, evidence of public engagement, as I mentioned, as well as a signed attestation from the superintendent, and if desired, a request for oral argument. Now, once you have your package, you've submitted the request, you may be wondering how decisions are made, and that is up to the board, of course, and it takes place through a series of meetings, closed executive sessions. The AIB reviews the request in full, and they decide whether to approve or deny, either in whole or in part. The decision includes it establishes the duration of any waiver that may be granted and then any conditions that come along with the granting of that waiver. So, for example, we've had, or the board has had, one request so far from Carroll County. Back in April of 2025, they submitted a waiver request. And during a special board meeting at the end of that same month, April 28th to be exact, the board deliberated and issued a decision on their waiver request submitted in that same month. The board voted to approve Carroll County's waiver request for 2 programs, multilingual learners and compensatory education, for all of their schools, and then for 2 fiscal years, fiscal year 26 and 27. If you want to get more information on Carroll County's waiver request, you can review their request, the board meetings agenda, as well as the decision is all on the website. Last thing, when is the request decided on? So the AIB will issue a written decision as soon as practicable. The board aims to provide decisions within 30 days of receipt. So we are working to turn those around as quickly as we possibly can. All right, so we've answered who, what, when, how. Let's move on to an example. I did mention Carroll County's a little bit, but because that was last year, myself included, I wasn't even here for that. So let's kind of walk through an example using a fictional district. So I came up with XCPS. So there's a district, XCPS, that would like to submit a waiver for their 14 schools, all programs, and for fiscal year 2026. So what steps should they take to appropriately submit their request? We've walked through this a little bit. So gathering all the materials and information necessary, including for which programs, schools, and fiscal years is a waiver being sought. What is the grounds for requesting a waiver? What data and other documentation supporting the grounds is being submitted? What is the LEA's plan for reaching compliance with the law? Is an oral argument being requested? And then lastly, is there a signed attestation from the superintendent? As you are gathering these materials and this information, the next step is to hold public engagement. Make sure to include evidence of public engagement in your request. And then lastly, submitting to the AIB, and again, confirming whether you want an oral argument. Okay, so gathered the information, held public engagement, you submitted your waiver. Now you may be wondering what's going to happen next. So from there, staff, myself included, will review the request, may ask the district for revisions, updates, or any additional information before the board makes its final decision. The request will be shared with board members as well as posted on the AIB website. If an oral argument is requested and the request is granted, XCPS will present it at the next board meeting. And at that time, board members may ask questions of the LEA. Once the board has heard oral arguments, it will go into an executive session to hear legal advice from board counsel. From there, a written decision will then be drafted and circulated to board members and staff. At the next meeting, members will deliberate and vote on whether the waiver should be granted. And then lastly, Once that decision has come down, staff will finalize the signed written decision from the board and share it with the LEA and finally post it on the AIB website. So from there, we will go into a group discussion. I will actually turn this back over to Rachel, but before we jump into the discussion, I want to pause again for any other questions. I know that was a lot of info, so don't be shy to ask.
This may be of my own obliviousness, but is this like presentations slash availabilities to get these presentations available to these LEAs and boards so they can be informed and have the same opportunity that kind of we got here today to kind of walk through, ask you guys questions about this process?
Are you asking, to clarify, are you asking if this slide deck will be available? And if so, then yes.
Presentations similar to this available to, or having been in the past to local LEAs?
Do you want me to take that one?
Go ahead.
So on a couple of points, just to make it clear for everybody watching here, the PowerPoint and the recording, even though we started live streaming a little bit late because of technology, will be available on our website for anybody that wants to go back and see this one. In terms of the districts that we work with, they absolutely have access to this, and they absolutely can reach out at any time if they need any specifics or more information. But prior to this, a lot of this has been a collaborative effort in the last many years to figure it out. And so there are many opportunities to come together, like in different groups, like CFOs get a meeting where they come together, blueprint coordinators can raise these questions when they're in alike groups. There's a lot of opportunities for support and collaboration, and it's really important to do that because we're all learning together, and it's different in different districts, and there's a lot to figure out together. To that point, there are other audiences. There are board members who don't come to those things. In the event that a district does need any additional support or resources, they would just network with our staff, and we would be able to help provide those resources, whether it's through our team, MSDE's team, the CFOs around the state that are working on it, the vendor partners, or even we've had the resource allocation grants. So short answer, yes, we're all in this together. And if folks do need any resources, we would make those available.
Great. Thank you so much for the answer on that.
Any other questions? Alrighty, well, that is the end of my portion. Let's dive into the group discussion and any further Q&A. And then we will circle back at the end after the group discussion to share or show the slide deck that the slide that Heidi was referring to earlier. We have a resources slide with a number of different links. Most of them are linked back to our website, but just to kind of highlight them and make it easier for you to find.
Perfect. And Mr. Liu, help me out here. Group discussion. Do you want to start? Okay, perfect.
I'll get it covered. Before I introduce our two special guests that we have today, I first want to pass the baton to either Heather or Candace if they had initial thoughts, feedback, perspective they'd like to share, because I do know they work in finance in their respective districts.
So this is Heather Clayball, and I will start. So in Frederick County Public Schools, we are in the process of determining what waivers we'll be applying for. At this juncture, it looks like we'll be applying for some waivers having to do with compensatory education funding, multilingual learner funding, and we may need to apply for pre-K as well. One of the things that is important to know is, the LEAs range from 1,600, 1,700 students up to 160,000 students. And so the varying amounts of points that you have to, within getting this information correct, where you would have to apply for a waiver. So for example, my school district, I'm reporting on 67 schools, and there are 9 funding categories. So it's 603 data points that I could apply, in theory, could apply for a waiver. And some of those data points are so small because I have 2 multilingual language students at a school. And so if a teacher would leave partway through the year, I could not be in compliance for the waiver. And so determining when to apply for a waiver and when not to is it's a significant task, not only for the fiscal services team, but the superintendent and her leadership team, and then also the board. In Frederick, we in October provided an update on our FY27 budget process as we were just getting started, and also talked to our board about the waiver and let them know that we were applying for it. Plus, we did a survey out amongst the community to see how the community felt about it. And as you would imagine, it's not something that our community members are really tuned into. And our concern is we don't want it to sound as if we're not doing something that we're supposed to do for our schools. We have a robust staffing formula that looks at complexity factors in every school. So we not only staff based upon your enrollment band, but we do based upon your complexity factors. And those complexity factors include things like the number of free and reduced meal students you have at your school, the number of IEPs or 504s for special education, the number of multilingual learners, the mobilities of your students, various numbers of factors. And that's how we staff our schools. And so, as we're thinking about what's the best way to do this, there's also some complexity in how you code. So as you would imagine, at a school system of my size that has not, our budget is $970 million. There's an awful lot of coding going on because the transactions could be as small as $3.50 or as big as $3 million. So, making those determinations is quite a Herculean effort when we're decentralized in regard to coding. And we work really hard to train everyone on how important the coding is, but we spend a lot of time tracking things down. So I think, understanding the complexities that happen and, that there are some things, because there's lots of mobility within our staffing as well, creating the budget. We don't really have a finalized budget until we see our first payroll, because lots of people shift schools during the year. And so, those are the things that we're always weighing as we're having these considerations in regard to the waiver. And, it's also something that we've relayed to our county government partners so that they understand as well what it is that we're asking for too. Because again, we want to be good stewards of our funds that we receive from the state and the county, and we want to ensure that we're transparent in everything that we do.
Thank you so much, Heather. Candace, want to give you this opportunity if you have anything you'd like to add from your perspective.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. And thanks for mentioning the county because we are funding partners in this whole initiative, and there's a lot of talk about public engagement. And I just, going forward, I hope that, certain consideration is given that that's done to the county as well, too. I feel like sometimes the county government is left out of that engagement piece. So I hope that's a consideration. I do know in Worcester County, as far as minimum school funding, they're very fortunate because they have, they're still on MOE funding. So they have a lot more flexibility in their funding to meet the minimum school funding requirement. So I did reach out to the CFO of RLEA, and he said, because we fund so much more than the required local share, that they do have a lot more flexibility there. But again, it's very tricky. And we have in our county one particular high school that's about 3 times the size of our other 2 high schools. So just the economies of scale with being able to get those resources at the larger school is always going to be easier than at a smaller school. So there's a lot of factors in play and a lot to work through.
Awesome. Thank you, Candace. And at this time, I'd really like to introduce our 2 special guests. Matthew, I know you introduced yourself earlier. I was wondering if you'd come off of mute, introduce yourself again, and Mary, you do the same as well.
Sure, one more time. Yep. Matt Stansky, Chief Financial Officer for Anne Arundel County Public Schools. Turn it over to Mary.
Hi, everyone. My name's Mary Pat Fannin. I'm the Executive Director of PSAM, which is the Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no, thank you guys so much. Matt, I'd like to start with you. Could you share your perspective of a larger school district and Arundel County on everything we just talked about here?
Sure. Yeah, so I don't want to repeat too much what Heather described, but it's very similar. We started in this effort really 3 years ago on the coding piece, and really just kind of going account by account to kind of determine what makes the most sense given blueprint requirements. We did 2 years ago do some reallocating of we redid our staffing formula, similar to what Heather described. Lower class sizes, additional resources to schools that serve higher concentrations of poverty, students with IEPs. That came with some significant blowback, just say from the communities that the resources were coming from. There is a perception that Blueprint is completely additive, right? That all schools will be held harmless, and then schools with high concentration of poverty will get more money. I think that hasn't been our experience. While it's been additive, we've also had to do some reallocating. Fast forward to where we are now. We have not determined whether we're going to apply for a waiver. We're still looking at spending patterns. From a budgetary standpoint, we were in compliance with all schools and all categories. But obviously, you have to look at spending trends. And so we'll make a determination here in the next month as to whether or not we need any waivers for fiscal 26. But for fiscal 27, given our projections, we believe we're going to have about 20 schools that will not make it in one of the 9 categories that Heather described. And so without an infusion of, say, $9.5 million is our estimate into those schools, either through new money or through additional reallocations, we're going to have to apply for a waiver. So we're going to work through that with our budget process. Again, Heather described the intricacies of this. I think another thing to point out is for most Maryland LEAs, the spread in teacher salary is significant. So a third grade teacher at school A may make a salary of $61,000, and at school B, a third grade teacher may make a salary of $105,000. And it's all just based on their years of experience and their educational attainment. And so that is why you can see some significant spending pattern differences between schools within your district. Yes, 20 schools out of 130, correct. And there really isn't, and because all of our schools are very unique, there really isn't like a standardized way of like monitoring. And so you really just have to. So I've got a small budget team. I've assigned them each, 30 plus schools, and their job now is to make sure that we're hitting, we're on target to hitting all these compliance targets in the schools that they're assigned to. It has been a heavy lift. And so I think that's kind of where we are in Anne Arundel County at the moment. I do provide monthly financial reporting to my board, so the board is aware of sort of our status. It just mirrors the Power School dashboard that we submit to each month. Looking forward to the discussion.
No, thank you, Matthew. Mary, next up for you. I know you work all across the state, hear about so many different communities, perspectives. Can you speak more on this discussion we're having right now, on what's resonating and what else do you feel might be missing from the conversation?
Sure. I may take a little bit longer, but please cut me off. So a couple of big picture things I want to frame. MSF is a new term. It is a Maryland term of art. I think the closest you get in school finance is maybe school-based budgeting. And we do have one district, Baltimore City, that moved to a school-based budgeting format, and it took them about 10 years to work on this with a partner that was with them along the way. So I just want to put that in perspective. This is a big shift. This is a paradigm shift as far as education funding is concerned. It also has had significant human capital implications in our finance offices. Because this is new, we are all learning it together, and we are burning through staff. And we are having a really hard time maintaining folks in fiscal offices because this is so different and it's so unique. So we're not saying that it's bad, but it is difficult. And that is part of the reason why we actually initiated the request to the AIB and MSDE, we meaning the LEAs, asking for the runway, because everything was way off target with the blueprint. The Power School was not up and running. Our Bible, our baby blue book, we call it, was not finalized. And we all had new systems. Some of us had new systems that they were working with their coming off of COVID. There were problems getting some of these legacy systems into Power School. So I think it's important to think about all of the work that's gone into this and sort of where we are now. So I want to give it a little bit of context. The other thing is 75% was picked out of the air. We don't know. I mean, I was there. I was present during the Kirwan Commission in a different capacity. And I think even the AIB board members say now, not totally 100% sure where these values came from, but it is sort of, it's a blunt point. It's a metric that's sort of been decided. And yes, while Maryland's funding was determined to be regressive, not every single school district and not every single school was funded in a regressive manner. And, there were years where we were still #1 education, in the country. But yes, we definitely had disparities along where you lived, right? And the wealth of your local jurisdiction and how much your county may be funded above what the state funded. So I think those are all a little bit important context for us. And then the last thing I would say is this is about resource allocation, right? Like, it's not about the pie getting bigger as much. It is about working within the pie. But resource allocation means moving teachers. And I think that's really something that nobody wants to talk about because it's difficult. It's an emotional issue for schools. It's an emotional issue for employees. And when it happens, when superintendents use the authority that they have in law to move teachers to different schools to try to make some of these formulas work, we can lose teachers. We can lose the faith and culture of some schools. And it really comes out to be a very public discussion about winners and losers. And that's very difficult. So part of the waiver process is that we have to engage the community in why we're doing this, right? And it's very difficult to explain what minimum school funding is. I think you can understand the concept of funds following the students. But like Matt said, you could have 2 third-grade teachers in different schools, and one makes a lot more money than the other one does, and but maybe that one is really perfectly suited in that school, right? Like, we're not going to move that teacher just because we're out of compliance by 2 percentage points in another school. But these are the kind of conversations that people are having. And I say this a lot, but I'm going to say it again right now. We've been on this call for, I don't know, almost an hour, and we haven't said the word student achievement at all, right? The 2 words. And so I think we're starting to get to a point where it's like we're going to put in this hard work to create these infrastructures, but we've got to work on the outcomes. This has been very input based, but it is time for us to be able to show that some of our systems are working, as well as fulfilling the vision of the blueprint. And some of those school districts, when we did some of the initial data, were out of compliance, and some of them were in the highest performing schools and school districts. And so this is not, two things can be true at one time. I think we can say that you are not meeting minimum school funding, but you are achieving, and that these are not always perfect corollaries, I guess I could say. So I'm going to talk about the small school systems because we've got two big systems on the call, and thousands and thousands of data points, right? So Heather said 603 data points. I think Baltimore County was talking about, over 1,500, and we're talking about hitting the target on every one of those data points. This is an unprecedented amount of data that school systems have ever provided. And even if we were to report these in the aggregate, which is how you all get these presentations, you don't get you don't get 9 categories per school when you get a presentation on the advisory committee. You get it school-based or you get it LEA-based. And so even when we're in the aggregate, these are still thousands of lines of data that the public, that county governments, that school districts and parents have never seen before. So we really are talking about a new era of accountability and transparency. And I think that that's important. Are we 100%? Are we 75%? Are we 100% of the 75%? Not yet. And part of what you all asked us to talk about is like, how is this working? And we don't know yet, right? Like we have a bunch of districts who got dinged for not having their coding, right, for fiscal 2006. And most of those are the small districts where the CFO is wearing so many different hats, right? And so you have to be a coder, you have to think differently. You have to learn finance in a different way. And those are districts that have 1 or 2 people in their finance office. Yes, they have smaller systems, but they're still they don't have thought partners in their offices with them. They don't have people to help them troubleshoot. We try to provide, that relationship with other CFOs, but it's hard when you're literally sitting in front of a computer trying to figure out all of this coding. So some of this process for all the districts is, I don't know what I don't know. I don't know if I'm gonna need a waiver, right? I don't know exactly how the AIB is going to judge waivers. We're all going through this pretty much for the first time besides Carol, and even the rules have changed since Carol went through, or the procedures have gone through. So I think everyone is very unsure right now about what to do, and I feel like people are looking at their data for next year, and unless there's something that's a wild anomaly, they're going to say, we've got to see what our expenditures look like. Then we can really get a sense of if this is something we have to go and ask for a waiver for. So I think we're going to see 2 or 3 years where people are finding that groove. Also talking to the communities and, if you have 20 schools that you think might be out of compliance, does that mean 20 PTA meetings where you're trying to figure out and explain MSF? Is it discussion at a board meeting? All of these are new to school systems, new to the AIB. And, the other big piece here is, if we don't do this properly, what happens? Well, you are at risk of losing funds. And so in that context, your whole school system could be affected. So are you talking about public engagement to your whole school district because you cannot, you are missing your compliance targets at 8 of your 60 schools. So those are issues that the superintendents are thinking about. I think that we are really hopeful that that maybe the AIB board members will consider some of our requests in the past about aggregating some of this, even maybe aggregating in the short term on some of the legacy programs, and then moving, towards more specific data in the future. And then the last thing I'll say is 2/3 of our districts over the past 2 fiscal years, probably 3, have been cutting their budgets, have been in fiscal difficulties. The 1/3 that haven't are the districts that were that have higher amounts of poverty. And that's because the blueprint is very generous about the concentration of poverty funding, about the CPG funding. Those districts are doing pretty well, but that funding does not provide funding for our $60,000 minimum school salaries, and some of our other things in our career ladder. So I just want you to think about, we're wrestling with budgets that are extremely sensitive and difficult right now. And it doesn't feel like what people thought the blueprint was going to look like when we were out and people were out at Lawyers Mall and, asking the legislature to invest, billions of dollars into the school system. And, frankly, it's not a ton of new money. It's reallocating a lot of the money that we have. And I know that's a little bit controversial, that people will say that's not exactly the case, but it's how you can't deny what our budget processes have been the last couple of years. So thanks for allowing me to go a little bit off script there, but I think that bigger context is important.
No, thank you, Mary. I just want to give a minute and see if anyone else in this call would like to add on to this discussion or ask any questions.
I would just like to ask Mary Pat a real quick question. I think, and maybe I heard you wrong, but I think that you said that even reporting in the aggregate would not work for school systems. Is that what I heard you say?
Oh, no. At work in the aggregate is preferable to us. I think and we've been asking to report in the aggregate, for the last 2.5 years. Also, when a lot of us have done, or a lot of the districts have done an analysis to see sort of where they would shake out compliance-wise, and if they can report in the aggregate, I would say we would have very few waiver requests that would be coming.
So if I could jump in there. So we did a report for our board in Frederick County when we were talking about the waiver, and approximately 93% of our schools met when we looked at it in the aggregate. Less than 10% met when we looked at it individually. And it's a lot of it has to do with, and I think those of you who work in a school might have a much better thought about this than those of us who are in finances. What does a student who is a free or reduced meal student require? What does that mean? You're adding extra support. Or even when you think about a student who's a multilingual learner, there are different levels of multilingual learners. So a school that has multilingual learners, and I think I'm going to use the correct number, but are a level 4, where they're almost ready to test out, would need less resources than a school that has significant number of 1s. So that's like where sometimes the flexibility of the aggregate makes a lot of sense, because it gives us the opportunity to push in where we need to at the schools. Frederick has been in a unique position because we've been growing, and this year we're not. Statistically, we're staying about even. And because funding lags, that also creates another problem, because you have to plan for the teachers that are coming, not for the teachers based upon the amount of money of the teachers, of the students that were there the previous years. So that becomes a bit of a concern. But yes, the aggregate helps because it gives us some flexibility in regards to that. And I will say, we are an MOE county still, so there are additional funds beyond. And I know but our MOE shrinks, right? As the statute continues and the foundational amounts go up, the PPAs go up. I have significant concerns as we travel that way. How do you pay for everything else that is happening at the school system at 25%? You know, in Frederick County Public Schools, our special education costs have grown astronomically, and that's being picked up by our above maintenance of above local share and our additional foundation costs. And I don't think Frederick County Public Schools is unique in regards to special education and the funding that really hasn't been there as our special education enrollment has increased, but the cost for our special education enrollment has increased faster than the enrollment has increased.
But
If that
special
makes sense.
education, you're already able to report in the aggregate. And I wonder if if you all have data on you know, we just talked about LEAs being different and being unique and facing unique challenges. I know that Frederick is facing challenges that Carroll may not be, or that St. Mary's may not be, or whatever. And I think that it would be interesting to look at, you know, how close these school systems are in these various formulas. And I mean, are we talking about waivers from every single formula for every single school district, or are we talking about, you know, pieces here or there? Because the other thing that provides flexibility is waivers.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And I think my point about special education wasn't necessarily about meeting the percentage. It was about what the other funding sources have to meet the special education overages. So that's because there's not enough foundation money to meet the special education overages. That's
And
what
I think that's a
that's my
separate issue, right? That's a separate, I mean, we're
absolutely. That is
talking about different groups of students. And so I think robbing Peter to pay Paul is not necessarily the answer. But there are other answers out there, but I don't think it's in the minimum school funding realm. I think it's in some other discussions about funding in general.
Absolutely. But I will say this, the money we have is the money we have to use, and special education is federally mandated. So I have to meet the requirements of special education, and that could be to the detriment of something else because the costs are so much larger than the funding that's afforded to it. But I do think your point is interesting about seeing where the issues are. You know, I think a lot of us have participated with the strategic partners to look at how are you funding the schools with the higher comp ed? What are you using? And, you know, Frederick has been for the last 5 years using our multi-tiered staffing formula, which is really focuses on getting those resources to the schools. The schools that I had that were out of compliance in the aggregate were outliers. They were the highest comp. They were the highest schools with the highest farm rates, and they were the highest schools with the highest multilingual learners. And we want to move to a 4th tier because we know we need to put more resources in those schools. But we also know we have to provide minimum staffing at our schools that do not have those student populations. So it's that balancing act, which is what Matt talked about earlier. It's like the balancing act. How do you ensure that you're doing the minimum for a school that may have a population that does not have high farm, high ML, may not even have high special ed, but they need a minimum amount of staffing. And what we found is if we do that, then we take away from those schools. And so it's that balancing act that we're all looking for.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think that I think that there's you know, certainly concern or you know, empathy for that situation, but I think this definitely brings Mary Pat's point about student achievement into focus, because I think that if you look at the student achievement among those groups that where the funding has not historically been following those students, you're going to see where a lot of your deficits lie. So I think that's where minimum school funding comes into play, and that's the conversation that we need to be having.
And I think you're right in some situations, but I don't think it's that absolute across the board. I think when you look at individual schools, individual school systems, and you don't look at those aggregate data points for those groups for the statewide, I think you start to see that the achievement gaps are shrinking, and in some of those areas. The other thing I would say is this is forcing everyone to think differently. I mean, that was the point of the Kirwan Commission, right? It was to have you think about this and to look at your data in a different way. And I can say to a district, whether it's the CFO or the blueprint coordinator or the superintendent, that now is a part of our conversation in a different way than it probably was 6 or 7 years ago, right? And so I think that is important to get across. People are changing the way that they're staffing their schools. People are changing the way or thinking about the way that they're budgeting. Can they do it quickly? No. I mean, this is a big tanker, that has to turn very slowly. But these tiered staffing models that Heather's talking about and what Matt's done in Anne Arundel County, I mean, this is the philosophy of the money following the student and putting the resources where they're needed. And so I think I don't want to lose that point in our sort of technical frustration of everything, but.
And I don't want to lose. I think it's real. I totally agree with you, Mary Pat. I see every day we see the efforts that these school systems are making. But I think we want to remain focused that these kids get 13 years in the public school system. And so our job is to make this happen and make sure that those funds are hitting those students, those students that are most at need as quickly as possible. And I know that the school systems are doing that. I know CFOs are doing that. I know superintendents are doing that. But we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that, you have kids who were in kindergarten when the blueprint passed. They're currently in 4th grade. What grade are they going to be in when we finally get to the point where we're funding, their schools the way they're supposed to be funded?
All right. I'm sorry, hate to cut this off because we have about a few minutes left on the panel discussion. But speaking of students, I really wanted to give this last part of the panel discussion to lift up a couple of our student members of the advisory committee. If you'd like to add anything, Gavin or Vanessa.
I can add something real quick. First, I just want to say with sorry if I mispronounced this, Miss Fannin explained about the per school budget and how like it's budgetary matters per each individual school. I know that's an issue that Howard County is facing right now, shifting that over. Actually, luckily our our budget team came to present to HCAS, the county student government, so that was kind of nice for them to come to us and hear from that. And speaking on that and the feedback, and because I recently actually preparing for this meeting, we had a meeting last Wednesday where I got to talk to over around 70 students plus in person and over probably 50 online, and that's from every single high school and middle school in our county. And in that, it was very nice to see the regardance that as the point that's been kind of going around continuously, that achievement factor. Howard County continuously blessedly enough has ranked very high, and that achievement is very well for our students. And speaking from a student who is in a school that has a very high farms rate and a very high multilingual rate, actually having more Latinos than any other race, being myself actually Puerto Rican, it's very easy to see how achievement and statistics can transfer differently. But also a lot of our Latino community and my friends, for example, they don't want to go to normal college. They don't care about testing the same. They want to go into trade school, so they see less value in these test scores, and test scores aren't a good metric to gauge how they're successing because they're achieving in career and readiness where they were able to provide, and that's preparing them for what they want to do versus just a simple test saying, oh, this is achievement, this isn't. So I think that's also a factor we have to look at versus just numerical value. I also think at the AIB level, I know at least from the student side, it does feel like there's lack of opportunities to give input beyond, of course, us few student members. Like once the process is happening, like of course we can go to our county, but there's not as much as a way to express our needs to the greater level, because while this is what I'm going to say, it's harder for someone to relay information than you to say directly yourself. It's harder to say, oh, this is what students are feeling, this is how cuts are happening to us, this is how this transitioning is affecting us, from an adult perspective than a student's perspective. So I think that relayance is going to be is always been an issue, and having the opportunities for students to relay that in these application for waivers process may be beneficial. I also think another thing that has been, I think Ms. Fannin kind of touched on this, is certain counties do feel like the waiver process is near impossible, especially in those higher socioeconomic counties. For example, I can't speak on Montgomery County fully, but Howard and Montgomery kind of are in a similar place. We are very blessed having fairly high budgets, but also that doesn't mean we don't have issues on its own. And speaking from conversations with our own budgetary team, it feels as if it's near impossible to even ever get a waiver in history, because we are in this place that, oh, they're wealthy, or even some areas of the county are wealthy, they can't afford that. And then additionally, I would say with the per pupil thing, it also depends on area, because the school system can only do so much, but also, of course, higher socioeconomic area has more community support, which also plays a factor. For example, I'm just going to throw this out there. River Hill High School compared to my high school, Long Ridge High School, there's a lot more money concentrated in one area, so they can have more community programs. For example, the Chinese American Association, we have a very big presence in our county. They're able to provide a lot of resources to students across the field. So that's something that the school system just can't fiscally account for without raising taxes, which will cause also less people, or the county partnering with the county to raise taxes, which will cause students to move away. And on the multilingual and farm student learners, kind of that budgetary thing is and like balancing the act is kind of huge in my opinion. For example, Glen Elk High School, which is, if anybody knows about Howard County, is more on the countryside versus just I'm going to keep referencing my high school, Long Reach. There's still some ELD, which is our English language development learners or multilingual learners at Glen Elk, but because of how this current system is functioning and how they have to move people, they have nobody really to support them comparative to my high school, which is the main center hub for immigrant students. So I think looking at student achievement, but also beyond test scores, is something we need to look at, but also focusing on the fact that we need to make sure there's still someone there. Let's say as much students at Long Beach can't get support, but then none of the students at Glen Elk get support because they have a lower matter. I think it's better to give, at least this is just from my perspective, so I can speak only on my community of Howard County really, but it's better for at least those 5 students in this school to get support, and let's say 30 students in another school to get a little less support, but still get some support, than those 5 students not getting any support at all, which is kind of becoming the case in a lot of scenarios in this new balancing act, trying to prioritize these other schools in regards to that minimum funding. But yeah, that's just a little my 2 cents there.
Awesome. Thank you, Gavin. Before I go to Mary and Matt, because they're our special guests, for any final thoughts, I wanted to ask you, Vanessa, our other wonderful student member, if she'd like to add anything.
Yeah, thank you. Gavin really touched on most of my points I was gonna say. These waivers, I think that more accessibility and more opportunity for our counties to learn more about them, maybe through some information sessions, would be helpful. Just because, if it's just just more opportunity to just learn more about the process in general and have people familiarize with it would be helpful. But other than that, Gavin really touched most of my points I was gonna say, but yeah, thank you.
No,
Hey, Vanessa, I'm from St. Mary's County, so you tell Dr. Smith I would be happy to come on down and give a presentation at any time.
Okay, sounds good. I'll let him know. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. I really hate to cut off this wonderful conversation we're having because always running out of time, but I did want to offer our 2 special guests, Mary and Matt, for any final thoughts, statements, preferably 1 minute or less. But the floor is yours.
I mean, I love having the last word, but I'm not gonna take it. Thank you very much for having us. Very impressive student members on all of these advisory committees. So just keep up the good work and the interest in public policy, you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Matt?
Ditto. Great conversation as always. Looking forward to a continued conversation to tackle this very difficult challenge.
All right. Appreciate you guys. Pass it over to you, Rachel.
So unfortunately, I'm going to have to keep you all after class for about 45 minutes or so to keep talking about all of this. This has been such a phenomenal conversation. I have a couple of points. I was just taking a few notes as we were going, and just going to check off a couple quick things and then tie a few things together. First of all, there was a conversation about county perspective, and that came up. One of our priorities as we stood up the AIB, I've been here, I started my internship here 4 years ago. And so we've really tried to figure out how to engage the public. That is a big big, broad, there's a lot of people involved in this. We do routinely, annually go to MABE and MACO and MAC and 100 other, I swear there's, Alex, you have a number probably that we've reported how many different things we go to share. We can never get to everybody, but I do want to put it out there that please send a request to us, aib@maryland.gov. You need a conversation, we're coming. Whatever team you need, we're going to be there, we're going to show up, whether it's one county, a cluster of counties, a conference, anything. We have presented several times at MACO and at MABE, and we definitely we get invited, and sometimes we request to come. We've been on panels, we've brought some folks, we're happy to do that. We hear you tonight, and we're definitely going to look at that and the stakeholder engagement and make sure that we're reaching everybody. So thank you for raising that. Matt Stansky hails from my hometown, and I had the privilege of working with him when I was a charter school principal. And I'm just going to have to pause here and say, I heard everything you said about how hard this is, and it's hard. And I've been in touch with many of our districts. I know the strain on small teams. People would be surprised to know how many people work in central office on a budget team. It is not many. It is a lot of work, and there's a lot of things to be done. So I just want to pause for a minute and say thank you to every single person who works on these teams on the fiscal side. You don't usually get too much credit for the school system side. We give the love to the teachers and the bus drivers and the nurses. But you do an amazing job, and this is not easy. What I heard strongest tonight is that we're in the middle of a massive change management engagement. It is not a 2-year thing. It's not a 5-year thing. It's not done in 10 years. We're hoping we're kind of out of the implementation phase in 10 years and really rolling. But when you think about, if you've been through leadership trainings, when you think about all of those pieces, you have to get them all right. You have to know the vision. You have to have the resources. You have to know what the human capital needs are. You have to have so many things. So you're sending me back with some things to think about tonight and to look at, to see, are we knee deep in the messy middle still of school finance? And that this is the hard stuff. This isn't the only thing we're doing. We're moving forward on pillar 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But in this mess, we probably should expect some discomfort. We should probably expect that it's not easy. You know that, we know that, but dear golly, it's annoying because we'd just like to have the answers and make it all work. So I would encourage us all to just be mindful that at the heart of this is what's on this slide in front of you. You didn't hear the word student achievement because we're talking about minimum school funding tonight. We didn't bring you data on student achievement. We brought you a presentation about school funding, because we could talk to you for hours and hours and hours if you put our team up to talk about everything. When you look at the blueprint for Maryland's future and why Maryland is doing what Maryland is doing, it's the bold words on this slide. It's the unprecedented investment. Maryland is committed to its students. We made a choice. We looked at our data. We saw that we used to be number 1 and that we fell to middle of the pack in America, middle of the pack in the world. And we said, that's not okay. We used to be doing a better education. I watched it happen as an educator. The state of Maryland made a commitment to our students, our family, our citizens, and our economy and said, we have to study this. We have to, my dog went up to that. We have to study it. We have to figure out what the top performing systems in the world do. Not what does the neighbor near us do, who's better than us in the country. We did look at them too. And this was part of what they do. They had to reevaluate how they fund their schools. They also had to look at pre-K. They also had to look at the teacher workforce in pillar 3 and pillar 4 and pillar 5, all integrated. The next bold word there, it's for every kid. It's for every single student in this state, no matter their zip code. And it was mentioned tonight that there are disparities because of where you live. That is hard work to do. I live in Anne Arundel County. I felt all of that pain that happened a few years ago when the county worked to do what Blueprint is asking them to do. It is hard. It is hard. So every kid is our purpose here, to make sure that we are addressing those needs. One thing we didn't talk about is that the per pupil funding, which we talked about in November, and then the add-ons, that's legally required. Special education students need more funding to get the services that they need. Multilingual learners need more funding. Now in Maryland, we're making sure that happens. And that's critical because we differentiate based on need. Couple more quick points. Student achievement is the end goal. And Gavin, my heart melted. I told my team, I'm so glad we have students on this. We're changing our model of high school instruction and really instruction across the state of Maryland. Dual enrollment is now available to every single student, at least 60 credits. If we're sending you to college for 60 credits, we're not putting you in high school classrooms for 60 credits. We're working at the college level, or maybe you're in an apprenticeship. There's going to be fewer teachers there. There's going to be fewer classes offered because they're taking other things in other places. They're doing career-ready learning. All of these things have to be considered. Tonight, we heard the pain points of a massive change management task and how we do this. It's going to take 10 years. The piece that makes me most excited about this as a former long-serving principal, the goal of the fiscal side of this that we didn't talk about today is that our principals are more connected to their school funding. Our principals know their communities. Our principals know their businesses. They know their families. They know the needs. They don't know the money. That wasn't my job. I had a very small budget with money. The central office handled that when I was a principal. Now principals will be pulled more into the work to say, my school needs this. My community needs this. That's why that money's going there, is to differentiate it based on the needs of those schools. So the one piece that I want to really leave you with, and then one final closing thing, this is really hard work because it's values work and it's change management work and it's huge work. Any educator in this country will tell you that we always do more and we never take anything off our plates. Once we do a Christmas play, once we do a Valentine's Day play, we keep it on the books forever. Once we put a new club in, we don't always change. The world has changed, our education system is changing, and our student needs are changing. This is the time for a values-based conversation. What does our community want from our schools? What does our business community need from our schools? What does our local economy need from our schools? We have to engage all of the people that are connected to our schools, the whole community, and say, what do you value about education? What is most important to you about your student leaving this school? Is it reading, writing, and math? Is it swimming? Is it football? Is it soccer? Is it transportation to and from events and field trips? Is it more science labs or more technology labs? Is it more magnet programs or more this? We have to stop in Blueprint and rethink everything. We have to stop and say, what do our kids need and how do we get there? That's a lot of work that has to happen that's not this compliance work of all the coding. So the coding is hard. It's really annoying. And all of our folks doing it deserve a huge, huge pat on the back. The other work is big and hard too. And that's where we really have to lean in so that we can achieve this vision on this slide. Every student, a transformed system across Maryland that gives a world-class education that prepares our students for their future, for themselves, and for the state of Maryland to help grow our economy and to make sure that we live in an amazing place because we have a workforce who leaves our schools ready to contribute and grow our state. So that's my long diatribe. Sorry, I still am under 8 o'clock, Mr. Lewis. I did it. The last thing I want to mention, I am so glad, Gavin, that you mentioned student engagement. My team does get to work with students across the state. We've worked with a lot of the student leadership groups in the past. This year, we're expanding. We found a new partner who's going to help us think through hearing from students more. Is Blueprint reaching into our high schools? What are you learning? What don't you know? How do we get more information out? My personal passion as a principal is to make sure that students know what they're entitled under Blueprint. It's a law. What are you allowed to have? What can you ask for? How do you get the most out of your high school experience so it prepares you to have the next experience that you want? Are you going into the workforce? Are you going to the colleges? You're going to apprenticeship? What are you going to do next? If students don't know to ask, they don't get it. They need to know. So this is a next step for my team. So I'm really, really glad that you mentioned that. That I think covers my list. And if there are any questions, we will definitely take those. And then the last thing I want to say again, we are happy to take any email, any request for information, aib@maryland.gov. You want us to come talk? We'll come have a meeting with you. We'll come out to any corner of the state. I love coming to visit. Our team will come and chat. We'll do a virtual meeting. We can provide slides, we can provide information, we can be there, whatever you need. Please reach out. We would love to be part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. So just to wrap up, our next meeting is going to be Monday, February 9th, same time, 6:30 to 8 p.m. Our topic will be about special populations. But it's 8 o'clock. Thank you guys all for being here and hope you guys all have a good evening.
Thank you.